The MIDI controller world is something I've been a part of for decades. You know, at least a decade or more, almost about 15, 16 years, I started getting into MIDI controllers. I started my journey here on my John Mike YouTube channel, where I was reviewing pretty much every MIDI controller that's ever came out. I mean, there's not too many in the last 10 years that I have not talked about. So it's something that I'm very fond of. But I did a video recently where I was talking about the state of the union, basically, of MIDI controllers, that they have peaked, that there's really not anything interesting happening in the MIDI controller world, and there's not really anything interesting that they are doing, until I woke up the other day and I saw that Roli was doing something interesting. And let's check this out. So Roli, they just dropped this on us. This called the Airwave. And I think it's pretty interesting. I've seen a few things like this. There was a ring that kind of came out a few years ago that allowed you to do kind of some funky things. But this kind of is a different concept in of that it uses some IR stuff, some kind of trickery to kind of create some expression. So this is interesting. And it's $300. You can pre-order it now. Let's see what it's talking about. Andrew Wong dropped this video the same day that this dropped, kind of showcasing what this thing is and what it does. And let's take a look at it and see what this is.
Hey, it's Andrew Huang. And today we're looking at the Roli Airwave, which is a device that sits at the top of a MIDI controller and can really accurately detect your hands, and so you can use your gestures to control different musical parameters. Thank you to Roli for sponsoring this video. Let me show you how it works. So Airwave should be positioned flush with your MIDI controller. It connects to your computer with USB-C, and then it can just detect your hands.
So that's pretty dope, right? You know what I'm saying? Something interesting like that. The concept of being able to have something kind of read where your hands are, you know what I'm saying? But the thing that I worry about with this is he states it right out the gate, what I think is the major issue with this, that I think is going to be the major issue. I'm going to try to get one in so I can experiment with it myself. But here's one of my major issues with this is that...
Show you how it works. So Airwave should be positioned flush with your MIDI controller. It connects...
It needs to be flush with your MIDI controller, and it's got to be right in the center, and it's got to be in a space where it can read your hands. That's one thing that I think that this can fall apart at, you know what I'm saying? The fact that where it has to be positioned and how it has to be positioned. And I'm thinking about my own kind of desk, you know what I'm saying, and where my MIDI controller is. My MIDI controller is like positioned under my desk in a table. So I have to pull out this tray, and then I have to put the MIDI controller there. So it wouldn't work in this particular setup that I have. But, you know, I'd have to put it off to the side here with a smaller MIDI controller or something like that. Maybe it can work that way. But this is kind of interesting, you know, the way it looks and the way it functions. But let's not count it out yet. I'm not throwing it away. I still think it's really dope, but I just have questions.
To your computer with USB-C, and then it can just detect your hands. You might have to run a quick calibration procedure where you press 2 notes down with your index fingers, and that aligns your hand visuals with the keyboard visuals. There's also some different views, and you can even change what keyboard you're looking at. So for instance, if you've got a Rise 2, this visual will perfectly line up with your MIDI controller. Let's try that out.
That's cool. That's cool. Like the visuals, all of those little things like that, you know, it could be interesting to look at. I'm not sure, like even looking back at him when he's performing here, like it seems as though, let's see. Yeah, it's like he's looking more at his hands than he actually is at the screen. So while the visual aspect of this is probably really, really cool to be able to see your hands moving on the screen, I don't know who's going to be like, what do you want to be more kind of engaged in? Are you engaged in what's going on in the screen, or are you engaged with what's going on with your hands? Most of the time, even when I'm playing, I'm looking down at my hands. I'm not really looking at the screen. But this is a very dope visual, to say the least. He just goes through and performs a song here with it. And I don't want to get copyright strike because he did say he released the song, so I don't want to get like striked on that. But let's get into some of the functions.
Just in case you're not aware, this is the Seaboard Rise 2. It's Roli's squishy MIDI controller. I'm sure they've got more technical, cool ways to describe it, but it's a MIDI controller and it's squishy. Now check this out. I'm going to use the sustain pedal so I can lift both my hands.
That's really cool.
So if you look in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, you can see that it's tracking these 3 gestures that they're calling air raise, air glide, and air tilt. So raise is just up and down, glide is to the side, and tilt is kind of rotating your wrist outward.
Glide to the side, you know.
There's a little bit of a dead zone just above the surface of the keys. Like right now you can see none. Oh, it is detecting tilt there. I guess that's handy because you're not usually tilting your hands while you're playing, so you can immediately get that tilt. But yeah, the glide doesn't take effect because obviously that would be constantly happening as you're moving around the keys. And then raising, you have to go a certain amount, and I think it's your wrist actually that it detects before it activates. So you have some room to move around the keys and play totally normally without worrying about accidentally.
So here's my another question that I have about this, because it's kind of a user experience, right, type thing. So now I'm used to modulation. I'm used to all of these different aspects of, like, you know, manipulating MIDI, right? Manipulating modulation or LFOs or things of that nature, or envelopes. Now I have to, in addition to playing, I now have to learn another set of gestures, like being able to tilt and move, and then it's like this. So it's almost like a learning thing of learning how to use this instrument, this MIDI controller, learning how the modulation works. That's another thing that I would worry about, is how is that user experience going to be when I'm playing and I'm doing all of this? How is that going to translate? And if I tilt right, it ain't gliding. If I don't move to the side right, if I don't go up high enough, it didn't do that. So I'm pretty sure there's a small learning curve to figuring this out and how it works. But I think it's still cool. I think it's really dope, but it's just interesting. Man, you know what's crazy? And you know what really elevates a track? Having the right drums. And speaking of drums, if you haven't checked out Yosh's Drum Warehouse yet, you're seriously missing out. We connected with John Yosh, a 7-time Grammy Award winner, and we packed over 600 plus multi-sample sounds that work with any DAW and are perfectly formatted for Trigger 2. We're talking tons of snares, kicks, toms, and so much more. You name it, it's in this sample pack. So whether you're on Logic, Ableton, Pro Tools, Cubase, Bitwig, whatever you got, it's all here. It's ready to take your production to the next level. Seriously, go grab it right now. gospelproducers.com. All right, back to the show.
Gently triggering these gestures. Now there are so many things to talk about here. So at launch there's going to be about 100 synth presets, and by the way, these are all connected to Roli's Equator 2 software synth. If you go to the Airwave panel, you can see what it's tracking. And these are all assignable to pretty much any parameter on the synth, so you can just click one and then drag on a parameter to adjust how much you want it to modulate it. And of course, you can assign them to multiple things, so they can all be macro controls. You can.
That's really cool. I ain't even gonna hold you. That's actually pretty dope. That's actually pretty dope. You know, like, it reminds me of like a movie, that Jim Carrey movie from back in the day when he was I forgot what he's called, but he was being God. He got to be God for like a day or something like that. You know, being able to like do stuff with your hands and all of that. You know, that's what it kind of reminded me of. It's like he like, oh, wait a minute, I could do this. Oh, wait a minute, this can happen. You know, and so combining that with the visuals is actually a really, really dope situation. But hearing that he said something is quick if you miss it type thing, that kind of concerns me as well. So he said at launch, there's only going to be 100 synth presets that work with Roli's proprietary software. So this is where you kind of falls apart majorly for me is that now I'm locked into a ecosystem that is controlled only by Roli. And I'm pretty sure they're going to have a path to open this up to other developers and other, softwares and DAWs and all of that stuff to be able to control these things right there, but it's kind of interesting that now I'm only getting 100 presets that work within Roli's ecosystem. So I can't pull that up at launch and start working immediately with Ableton or with Logic Instruments or with Omnisphere or with Silent or Vital or any of these other, major software synths. You know what I mean? There's no support for those things. And I'm pretty sure they'll add them, down the line. But it says at launch, there's only going to be 100 sounds basically that you're going to be able to use with this, which the sound cool. I mean, sound dope. The proof is in the pudding. They took their time to really develop it out and make it sound like something. But you're going to be kind of locked into this ecosystem. So that's something to kind of remember with this particular product is that when you buy it, you're going to be locked into their ecosystem with their 100 sounds. And that's all you're going to have at launch. So you're not going to be able to do anything else outside of that ecosystem. So that's kind of where I say that's the major point where it falls apart. But I think the aspect of this is still really, really cool. And he kind of gets in, I'll link the video in the description of this so you guys can watch the full thing. But he kind of goes through and shows like how the technology works and how it kind of maps to your hands. You have to calibrate it. So it's one of those things, and he just kind of performs. It's a really cool, interesting take on, the average MIDI controller, so to speak. And I think that makes it a really, really dope thing to maybe some of you should check out. I'm definitely going to try to get my hands on one and pay attention, kind of play around with it and see what happens. But my big takeaways from this is that I think it's dope, but I see three major problems with it. Problem one is that it's location based. You got to have it lined up just right with your MIDI controller in order to be able to really do something with it. It's got to be in this very specific position over your keys so it can read your hands. The second check that I have with it is that it's a new thing to learn. And that's probably like I told you, there was a few years ago where there was like a MIDI ring thing that came out that kind of did the same thing, allowed you to kind of do some gestures and stuff like that. It didn't really move. It didn't really take off. I'm pretty sure there's some people somewhere that's still using that, but it didn't really grow or move into something and really blossom out because people had to learn a new framework in order to use this thing. And so one thing about technology and music and performing and creative, anything that's too technical takes you out of the creative space because now you're spending more time trying to get the result out of getting your wrist in the right, form and twisting your arms the right way and getting it to the right height just to be creative. You know what I'm saying? And so that's my fear where it fall apart. And then the third place where I think this could possibly not work is where, the sound set that comes with it. Like you're going to be really, really limited at launch. You're only going to get 100 sounds. You know what I'm saying? And you're going to be locked into Roli's ecosystem only with this particular product. So I think that's kind of where it falls apart for me. But I'm still going to try to get my hands on it because I think it's interesting. And it's definitely a fresh take on the MIDI controller, and what it's kind of capable of. It gets you out of the stale slab that they've been giving us. All these companies have been giving us for the last like 10 years. They've just been slopping the same board with a fresh coat of paint, to us. And so Roli said, let's try something different. And I give major shout out, major kudos to Roli for actually trying to push the envelope and do something different, which they've been known to do that over the years. But big shout out to them. I'm going to try to get my hands on this. I'm probably going to pre-order it just to get it and see what happens and check it out. But you guys let me know what you think about it down in the description or down in the comment section. Let me know what you guys think about it and we'll tap in.